Ryan Doyle in for Alex Pearson. A white privilege workshop offered to elementary teachers in the province of Ontario by their union isn't really raising any red flags with Ontario's Education Minister Liz Sandals. Sure, she doesn't like the name white privilege and perhaps would like to have a different title put in place, but she doesn't have any problem with the actual concept. That, according to her yesterday. Tristan Emanuel is here today to talk a little bit about this. Surprise you at all that the Education Minister is in favor of the concept of teaching white privilege?
No, not at all. And I'm not. I had to laugh though about how they like to play these spin games about how, because it's an independent organization, that they really have no say or influence on their decisions. I mean, this is a public sector union, and absolutely, as the government, they would have a great deal of influence, pardon me, over the decisions and over the policies that a public sector union like the teachers union would be engaged in. But I think the way we should look at this is kind of the institutionalization of what I call Anglo self-hatred. You know, this is about white people making white people feel bad about past grievances, and the way to rectify it is to segregate them and ostracize them, identify them as a so-called privileged class. And I had to take issue with, I mean, I think any person of reason should have a visceral reaction to Sam Hammond, the spokesperson for the Ontario Teachers Federation, when he brought up those two inane examples of privilege. Did you see those?
Yeah, I heard some of them, yep.
The one was, of course, in housing, and he said people of minority background and different skin colors feel alienated when it comes to housing options here in the larger cities. That was the one example of how white people are privileged. And then the other one he says is that as a person who is white, a male, and he wears a suit, he doesn't get randomly checked by the police. And there's another example of how white people are treated with privilege.
Yeah, and those two examples are absolutely idiotic. And
absolutely.
If this is the kind of stuff we're now going to spread into the minds of teachers, who then are going to spread this into the minds of students in front of them, we've got a real problem on our hands. Because quite frankly, I can tell you that the prices of Toronto's housing market, at the very least, make me feel alienated. So I'm a white guy, and I know as a white guy I'm probably breaking all the rules by you and I, two white guys, talking about this issue. But that's part of what happens here. People who are white get guilted into the fact that, you can't talk about it. What do you know? You're part of the privileged class. I can tell you I didn't grow up in the best of neighborhoods. I had to fight for every single thing that I've ever accomplished, and it's insulting to me. And if this was another group that we were talking about, if the union was teaching workshops on black privilege, people would be crying racism. So how is it that when you call a workshop a white privilege workshop, that's not racist the other way?
Well, right, it absolutely is. I mean, let's call it what it is. And that's why I call it a form of Anglo self-hatred that's being institutionalized. I wrote about this about 7 years ago, and I used to write for WorldNet Daily as a regular contributor, and I put out a column called Anglo Self-Hatred and the Disguise of Multiculturalism. And so let me clarify. Multiculturalism as a philosophy is one thing, but as a public policy where the government arbitrarily makes choices, to me, I argued the fact that what's happening here in the West is there is a systematic institutionalization of hatred against white people. And ironically, the people who are at the forefront of this are elitist whites themselves. It's usually white liberals who come from elitist backgrounds. Like I think of like a Bob Ray, who comes from a very wealthy class background, who tends to be ivory tower in his ideas, who can sit back and kind of say, well, because I've had a good life experience and I was brought up with these, therefore this is true for all white people. And after all, look at the benefits we've had here in Canada and the US and our European allies. Look at what we used to do with imperialism. Therefore, we're bad. Therefore, we owe everyone else an explanation. And the best way to do it is to punish us now.
Yeah, and I find that those people, I like to put it this way, you know, they've got time for the guilt trip while the rest of us are working. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, because there are all sorts of levels of class when it comes to socioeconomic class that white people deal with. And I'm not insensitive to the hardships that happen in minority communities.
Sure.
But to label it all with the same brush is a big part of the problem. And I think when you look at the education minister, and if she has a problem with the name alone, the white privilege workshop, then certainly she, deep down, if she examines her core, likely has a problem with the concept itself.
Right. And there should be a visceral reaction over the title itself. I mean, I think that is absurd and outrageous, as you pointed out. It's very offensive for them to have this as a policy discussion at their next conference. They're going to talk about white privilege to teachers, and of course they're going to be encouraging teachers to discuss this in the classrooms, to young, influential minds, to make them feel even worse about who they are, where they've come from, and to denigrate our past heritage as if everything in the past is bad because of some of the bad things that happened. It's ridiculous. You couldn't get away with this. For instance, I was talking to somebody, if you went to Saudi Arabia and they introduced some kind of Arabic privilege class, they'd be outraged over the idea that you'd be denigrating your heritage and your culture and your skin color because of bad things that have happened.
Well, and I also look at it this way. Not only are they going to be teaching those influential minds, but anytime a teacher that has gone through a workshop like this is dealing with a student who is of a different race and it's a white teacher, they're going to be walking on eggshells.
Yeah,
they're going to be in an extra sensitive situation. They're going to think back to this workshop that they took. And I don't think I'm overthinking this at all. I think, honest to God, you put a teacher in a workshop and you feed them with ideas that what they have is bad and it was only based on the color of their skin that they got to where they were, then they're going to start to have some second thoughts when dealing with kids of all different races.
Right.
And the problem for me is that it starts to segregate ideas and beliefs and treatments that come from those teachers when we should be an all-inclusive bunch where teachers shouldn't be picking and choosing how they treat kids. It should be everybody is equal in the terms of the classroom.
If you're going to encourage diversity, the way to deal with that is not to talk about past grievances or to identify or segregate whites because of so-called privilege beliefs. The way to deal with that, quite frankly, is to encourage people from minority groups to feel empowered about themselves, to feel good about themselves, and to identify the things in their culture that are good and great, rather than focusing on white privilege, which, frankly, in many ways is a fantasy these days. You know, even his examples aren't true to form. I'm a white man. I wear a suit, and I have been
How dare you, sir?
I've been randomly stopped by police officers many times. Ride check. You know, why are you out at a certain time of night? You know, they're asking me questions. Do I get offended? Do I say you did this because of the color of my skin? Or no, but it happens to me, and it's happened actually quite often in the last 3 years because I happen to be out late at night. You know, should I take that as an example of some kind of form of racism? Perhaps we should. The concern I have, and the reason why I think that more people need to be concerned about it, I just see the systemic encroachment here on this. And I see a day, I mean, maybe it's a reversal of fortunes, and this sounds almost alarmist, but if things continue the way they are, then I can see a day in which, because white people demographically are in a decline here, where you could see a complete reversal of this kind of behavior so that whites are alienated because they are the minority.
Well, yeah, and I mean, if you look at the City of Toronto, a report was just done this past week that said 63% of the makeup of the City of Toronto will be a visible minority by 2023. That is 9 years away from now.
Right.
So if that's the case, and this is the idea that's being kicked around, I very well could see that being the reality.
Right, absolutely. I'm a publisher, as you know. I've got a new book out, not by me, but by a Toronto author named James Tennant, who's written sort of about this phenomena. The book's called 225. It's a fiction. It's sort of a 1984 meets the modern era, talking about how a progressive culture has been encroaching on our rights and is stripping away what we've always understood to be fundamental norms, and making people who are white and perhaps Christian or conservative Jews feel like they're bad because of what they are. So the book is fascinating, and it's apropos to the subject matter, so I thought I'd bring it into the studio.
Yeah, and I mean,
you can get it on Amazon.ca.
It's pretty timely, but why does government not take a stand then? Why is Liz Sandals out there yesterday saying what she said as opposed to condemning it?
Well, I think I think that there is a push to institutionalize this form of racism, and I think the Liberals are spearheading that. I mean, the many things that they've done on a political standpoint from their policies have been puzzling to me.
Yeah, and
this is just another offshoot of that.
It just falls right in line with what they've been doing all along. Tristan, we appreciate the time.
Thank you.